Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for the first virtual session of this year's Audubon, Florida Assembly. I'm Mary Jean Yan. I'm the chair of Audubon, Florida's Board Policy Committee. I'm excited to be with all of you tonight and to work through the conservation agenda and approve our statewide and regional conservation priorities. I think we've got everybody kind of trickling in right now, so I'm going to pause for just a moment, make sure we've got everybody in. We definitely appreciate your patience with the delays that resulted from Hurricane Ian. And while most of, or I guess all of Audubon staff made it through Hurricane Ian, many others, individuals, communities, entire communities have got hit hard and are going to have a long road to recovery. So we wanted to say that our thoughts are with those still struggling in the aftermath of the storm. Please know that Audubon, Florida continues to strive towards and advocate for policies and projects to build a more resilient Florida. Now more than ever, I think we can make that case. Tonight, we're excited to share with you this year's slate of conservation priorities. Make sure you're muted. Tonight, we're excited to share with you this year's slate of conservation priorities for adoption at our annual conservation agenda and setting webinar. I want to cover just a few housekeeping items before we get going. I think these are known to most of you, but please make sure you stay on mute for the duration of the presentation. Change your Zoom view to just the speaker, just to kind of minimize the clutter. We've got closed captions that are being shared with this presentation tonight. So you have that opportunity if you want to enable closed captions or subtitles. Feel free to use the chat function. It's at the bottom of your screen to pose questions to the presenters once we get going with them. And then we'll answer all questions at the end of the session. I also want to give a special shout out to our sponsors. We all know we couldn't do this without our sponsors. And they include, and if we can go to the next screen, please. Yes, they include Duke Energy, the Ferber Company, Public Supermarkets, Babcock Ranch, Lee County and Electrical Cooperative, Riverglades Family Offices, Vulcan Materials Company, and certainly Florida Power and Light Company. Yeah. Also want to let you know that this entire session is being recorded and it'll be available after assembly. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I want to make sure that we kind of go over the history and the process that's involved in bringing us to this point tonight. When Audubon, Florida was formed as an alliance of the National Audubon Society, Florida Audubon Society, and Audubon chapters, the new state board of directors made a commitment to work on conservation. To achieve this, the board at that time committed to holding an annual Audubon assembly to set conservation priorities and to organize regional conservation committees, which we're going to refer to as RCCs, to coordinate chapter conservation work. The regional conservation committees are designed to coordinate the work of Audubon chapters on regional priorities that are in alignment with Florida Audubon's policy priorities. The Audubon's Florida policy priorities consist of coastal conservation, water, climate, working lands, and bird-friendly communities. Each RCC is asked to propose and present a regional conservation priority resolution at the Audubon Assembly each year that addresses the 2 to 3 common priorities in the RCC's chapters that they'll work together on during the coming year. The statewide conservation priorities are recommended by Audubon, Florida's Board Policy Committee. Regional resolutions are independent of these state conservation policies, but ultimately we end up working together on everything. The results of tonight's vote and completed conservation priorities will be presented to Audubon, Florida Board of Directors meeting for final approval, and they'll be meeting on this coming Saturday, October 15th, also by webinar or Zoom. These resolutions then become the guiding documents for implementing Audubon Florida's conservation action agenda for the next year. The process fulfills the commitment that was made to National Audubon. While the process that I just laid out sounds like it's brief and easy, be assured that a lot of work has gone into what you're going to hear tonight. There's been considerable planning, thought, collaboration, all of this taking place in many months leading up to this evening. The completed priority documents will be posted, they have been posted on the Assembly website, and then ultimately reside on the Audubon Florida website after they've been adopted. I want to give you a little heads up that I'll be sharing the moderating duties tonight with Beth Alvey. So don't be surprised when we kind of switch in and out. And I think with all that said, we're ready to get going and to proceed. What I'd like to do right now is to invite one by one a staff member from each of Audubon Florida's policy areas and a representative from each of the chapter regions to share the highlights of what they have to present tonight. Erica Zambello will then call for a vote to accept after everyone has spoken. You'll also have the ability to approve each area individually as part of that vote. So with that said and that groundwork laid, we'll move into the conservation priorities first. And I believe that our first one will be coastal conservation. Audrey DEROSE-WILSON will be leading, and then we'll go seamlessly from each priority to the next, and then the RCC. So Audrey, you want to take it away?
Hi, everyone. I am Audrey DEROSE-WILSON, Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon, Florida, and I'm talking about our coastal priorities. Florida's significance as part of the Atlantic Flyway is most evident in our coastal areas. Shorebirds and seabirds stop over during their hemispheric migrations, and raptors follow dune lines as they work their way south. Neotropical songbird migrants face daunting odds of long overwater flights, and they use our coastal habitats as their last southbound jumping off point and first northbound landfalls. The geology of Florida's coast is always in flux, and Florida's bird life is too. Coastal ecosystems contribute substantially to Florida's economic vitality and quality of life, and yet they are threatened by excessive nutrient loads in urban and agricultural runoff, beach grooming, coastal development, coastal armoring and dredging, and human recreational activities that disturbs birds. Because of the extraordinary value and tremendous vulnerability of coastal habitats, Audubon Florida and National Audubon Society rank coastal conservation among our highest priorities. Not only does Florida have the largest coastal program among many states, but we have also channeled considerable financial funding into coastal resiliency projects. Audubon resolves to employ sound science to guide conservation at coastal important bird areas and to engage a diversity of people in protecting Florida's special coastal places through partnerships such as the Florida Shorebird Alliance. We will make concerted and regular efforts to recruit and train bird stewardship volunteers from a broad diversity of underrepresented communities and to share with them the joy of birds nesting on beaches, rooftops, and mangrove islands. We will advocate for birds and other wildlife by supporting conservation-based policies and climate change planning efforts. We will continue to advocate for the protection and acquisition of upland and near-coast conservation lands to provide for coastal birds as sea levels rise. We will promote planned shoreline retreat for vulnerable human communities rather than armoring in response to sea level rise. We will advocate for freshwater management rules and policies that reduce nutrient loads funneling into coastal waters to decrease the frequency of, to decrease the frequency and duration of red tide and cyanobacteria outbreaks. We will advocate for the protection of coastal habitat from the effects of climate change in ways that will prevent climate change gentrification. And finally, in the aftermath of storms like Ian, we will help to assess the impacts to birds and habitat and identify priorities for recovery and restoration efforts. And with that, I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Caitlin NEWCAMP, and I'm the new Everglades Policy Associate with Audubon, Florida. And it is a pleasure to be with you this evening and to present the state conservation priority of water. So water connects and defines Florida's natural ecosystems from springs and rivers to wetlands and seagrass beds. Water is the basis of our ecology and economy in the state of Florida. Alteration of Florida's landscape has contributed to overdrained wetlands and depleted aquifers. Pollution has caused many of our waterways to become degraded and impaired, bringing about significant harm to fish and wildlife. Increasingly high demands for water throughout the state, coupled with dwindling natural storage capacity, have created a struggle for water between people and the environment. These threats make it all the more challenging for our natural environments to support birds, and they demand us to take action. Therefore, Audubon staff and chapters resolved to take the actions described in the state conservation priority for water, and I will summarize those now. First, we will protect water at the source by encouraging expansion and improvement of floodplain, spring shed, and water recharge protection through public land acquisition, conservation easements, and restoration programs, and by working to improve wetland protections at state and local levels through increased scrutiny of regulatory agency actions, such as FDEP's new Clean Water Act permitting authority, and advocating for sufficient funding, including the continuation of millage rates so that water management districts can perform their duties. We also resolved to advocate for sustainable water supplies for natural and built systems by supporting water conservation programs, water use reduction, and the use of alternative water supplies as conditions in water supply consumptive use permits, and by promoting sustainable alternative water supply projects, including those using reclaimed and stormwater that improve conditions in natural systems, and also by reducing the use of turf grass and converting to native plants to support wildlife and water goals. We further resolved to advocate for water quality improvements by campaigning for stronger state and local stormwater and wastewater treatment requirements that protect ecological health, and by working to improve enforcement of state water laws, and by seeking to improve agricultural water use and management through the improvement of agricultural best management practices. We resolve also to continue our longstanding work to protect and restore America's Everglades by securing increased and consistent funding at the state and federal levels to advance the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan and other key Everglades restoration programs in order to increase freshwater storage, maximize freshwater flows, and achieve maximum ecosystem benefits as quickly as possible. And also by continuing to advocate for increased cooperative water storage solutions north of Lake Okeechobee to provide additional capacity, reduce excessive water flows, and enable water quality treatment. Finally, we resolved to advocate for equitable water policies that ensure all people have access to clean, safe, and affordable water supplies by researching and assessing where new policy can support environmental justice, and by ensuring that no community is disproportionately harmed economically or otherwise when water resource benefits are distributed, and by advocating that local, state, and federal environmental programs and agency decisions are administered fairly and without any form of discrimination. This concludes the presentation of the water priority, and we will now move it on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Kosick, Engagement Manager of Conservation Leadership and Climate Initiatives for Audubon, Florida, and I will be presenting Audubon, Florida's climate priorities for the 2023 State Conservation Action Agenda. Climate change knows no boundaries, and Florida is especially vulnerable to its effects as it has so recently been demonstrated. Sea level rise, intensifying storms, and catastrophic wildfires are just some of the impacts we will continue to see as our climate changes. These factors will not only impact birds and wildlife species, but also humans, reducing risks to our economy and protecting our communities is a pressing issue. Outdated infrastructure, destruction of natural flood prevention and carbon storing systems, and greenhouse gas emitting energy sources continue to exacerbate the impacts of climate change on our state. Audubon, Florida is dedicated to addressing these threats in order to mitigate climate change through greenhouse gas reduction and to adapt to a changing climate, creating more resilient communities and ecosystems throughout Florida. Therefore, Audubon, Florida resolves to take the actions described in the proposed state conservation priority for climate. I'll summarize those points now. promoting projects that mimic natural processes through the use of natural and hybrid green and gray infrastructure, prioritizing the protection and restoration of our natural ecosystems that form a first-line defense against storms, which include shoreline protection through natural infrastructure, which includes salt marshes, seagrass beds, coral reefs, and mangrove forests, and healthy wetlands that absorb floodwaters, clean waters, and act as carbon sinks and water storage structures. Opposing ecologically harmful and expensive adaptation strategies, including beach armoring, seawalls, and other practices that marginalize or eliminate habitats. Supporting policies and programs that assist in the development of carbon sequestration projects such as blue carbon, sustainable forestry, and ranching. Educating the public and policymakers about climate impacts on people, birds, and wildlife, habitats, and water resources. Encouraging statewide and regional collaboration through facilitating partnerships amongst governments, organizations, and businesses to analyze climate change impacts and to develop region-wide resilience plans, providing landscape-level action and solutions that are cost-effective and additive. Supporting the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by advocating for adoption of ordinances and programs that promote the conversion to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and electric vehicle readiness. Encouraging innovation in energy technologies such as battery storage and improved grid technology in order to expand the availability, the resiliency, and the efficiency of renewable energy resources. Advocating for the responsible siting and improved planning of utility infrastructure such as solar fields and wastewater facilities. And partnering with underserved communities and representative organizations to ensure equitable resilience planning, funding distribution, policies, and outcomes. This completes my presentation of Audubon Florida's climate priorities for the 2023 Conservation Agenda. And now we'll move on to the next speaker.
Hi, I'm Charles Lee, Director of Advocacy of Audubon, Florida. And the working lands priority reflects our ongoing statewide effort to protect our remaining ecosystems, important wildlife habitats, undeveloped rural lands, and the state's important ranch land and agricultural lands, keeping them from disappearing under the onslaught of pressures for urban development. Gauging the importance of lands to be protected, what should we really be working on, is guided by objective information sources, such as the GIS-based Florida Natural Areas Inventory, Audubon's own important bird area programs, and information obtained from Audubon's Eagle Watch and Jay-Watch programs. 4 key categories are pursued under the working lands conservation priority. First, we're spending a lot of effort engaging in advocacy for expanding state funding directed to conservation land and easement acquisition efforts, such as Florida Forever, the Rural and Family Lands Easement Programs. And we're also working to help support local government initiatives to develop within a county or counties conservation land acquisition programs. Second, we're working with landowners, particularly the owners of large tracts of rural ranch land and natural habitats, to encourage monetization of land resources through programs such as state purchases of easements and other activities that avoid the tendency for these lands to be converted away from natural landscapes and agriculture and into harmful development. We're also engaging, as a third plank of our effort, in regulatory processes to seek decisions that either deny approval of inappropriate development proposals or guide the outcome of development proposals to achieve the maximum conservation land set-asides as trade-off for any development that may be allowed. And finally, we are engaged in advocacy against new highways and other linear facilities through rural areas that would open them up to development, or highways and similar linear facilities that would impact conservation lands. We attempt to work with agencies that are proposing such facilities to secure alternatives that avoid the impacts, preferring the expansion of existing roads over new alignments, and negotiation of leverage trade-offs that result in even greater areas of conservation land being preserved if the construction of a linear facility is unavoidable. We've made a couple of minor changes this year to this priority, mainly to reflect the increasing statistics on the amount of land that we've successfully been able to move into the conservation category. We're also working very hard on a number of specific confrontations with major developments that are affecting these areas. With that, I will move it on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Charles. My name is Jackie Sulek, and I am the Chapter Conservation Manager for Audubon, Florida. And I will be presenting a very brief overview of bird-friendly communities priorities. Fortunately, over 500 species of birds consider Florida home, either as year-round residents, seasonal nesters, or just passing through. So ample clean water, food, and shelter are absolutely critical for their survival. Rampant urbanization continues to fragment and transform our ecologically productive lands. Hazards such as sterile lawns, walls of glass, pesticides, domestic predators, and excessive lighting reduce the function of our landscapes. The Bird-Friendly Communities Program is designed to address the greatest threats to birds. Interest in birds and nature continues to grow, but access to green spaces can be a luxury in many urban communities. By building a more inclusive Audubon, we hope to provide both the healing benefits of nature for all, as well as safe spaces for birds. Therefore, be it resolved, Audubon Florida staff, working with its 45 Audubon chapters and our collective partners, will do the following. Number one, we will continue to promote and support the National Audubon Society's Plants for Birds program. By coordinating with the Plants for Birds financial opportunities offered by a variety of different partners, by working with Florida Power and Light and other partners to incorporate bird-friendly elements in their solar energy centers. Minimize building strikes and lighting distractions by coordinating with National Audubon's Lights Out program and taking local action to reduce building strikes. We will provide good homes for birds by installing nesting structures and by coordinating with Audubon Florida and chapter community science programs to provide housing for birds in safe spaces. And finally, we will increase and engage Audubon membership through outreach, education, and advocacy by promoting educational materials such as Audubon Adventures, by supporting the creation of new college chapters and college ambassadors, and by recruiting advocates on statewide and local and national issues. We will strive to engage broader audiences and perspectives to benefit and improve the quality of life for people and provide the critical resources for the birds that we love. Thank you. And now we will go on to our regional priorities, to our next speaker.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you see me? Hello, I'm Steve Buczynski, the chapter president of Henry Glades Audubon Society and regional representative for the Audubon of Southwest Florida region, representative to the board of directors. Audubon has a long history of in the Western Everglades region, beginning with hiring wardens to protect wading bird colonies from plume hunters, later creating the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary and helping to secure federal and public lands. The 5 affiliated Southwest Florida organizations are committed to working together to protect and restore the Southwest Florida watersheds and downstream coastal ecosystems in the face of rapid human population growth and increasing anthropogenic climate change impacts. Our 4 areas of priority that we will be following and a brief description of our objectives are as follows. First, we will work to reduce harmful algal blooms. Reducing harmful algal blooms in Southwest Florida through nutrient source control, watershed restoration, wetland preservation, and protection of connected coastal and inland habitats from Lake Okeechobee, the Caloosahatchee River, the Peace River, and Charlotte Harbor, and Big Cypress and Corkscrew Swamp to their downstream estuaries and beaches. Support Audubon calls for advocacy relating to issues such as improvement of stormwater treatment infrastructure, removal of septic systems in densely populated areas. Additionally, Southwest Florida chapters may elect to engage in some or all a variety of support activities on several levels, including homes, neighborhoods, streets, municipalities, and counties. Our conservation and enhancement of wildlife habitat and land of environmental value priority includes supporting Audubon's calls to support Audubon calls to advocate for purchase of environmental sensitive land, conservation easements, and similar measures, especially in Southwest Florida. We will support local initiatives such as Plants for Bird campaigns, native tree planting, urban wildlife habitat creation, turf grass conversion to native plants, and reduction of risk to birds from buildings. Priority number 3 is enhanced regional and local sea level rise, climate change adaptation, and mitigation planning and implementation. We will encourage local government participation in the Southwest Florida Regional Resiliency Coalition, assure governments fairly evaluate the University of Florida, Gulf Coast University, ACUNE, and other models of sea level rise and climate impacts in deciding on actions required to protect human and wildlife communities at risk in Southwest Florida. We will promote local and regional measures to lower greenhouse gas emissions and increase resiliency through nature-based strategies such as watershed restoration, offshore and oyster reef creation, coastal bird and habitat stewardship, or mangrove and seagrass restoration. And fourthly, we will increase diversity of chapter membership and leadership, as well as the beneficiaries of chapter programs. We will ensure that such activities as Plants for Birds, urban wildlife support, and native tree plantings benefit all communities. Support efforts to remediate pollution and other negative environmental outcomes which differentially affect less advantageous groups. Special efforts will also be made to assure that Audubon environmental education programs reach more diverse audiences. And that concludes my presentation. We'll proceed to the next speaker. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kirsten Hines, the Plants for Birds lead at Tropical Audubon Society and newly elected vice president in Miami. And I'm here representing the Everglades region of Audubon, Florida, which includes 4 counties in the southeastern quarter of Florida, stretching through from Palm Beach through Broward and Miami-Dade counties into Monroe County in the Florida Keys. Nestled adjacent to the Caribbean, our region houses the highest diversity of tropical species and habitats, not only in the state, but also within the continental United States. Our region houses 3 national parks, including Everglades National Park, which is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. The importance of this milestone cannot be overstated, given the park's proximity to one of the densest and fastest growing urban areas in the nation. Formed initially to protect plume birds, a tropical forest, and the southern tip of the Everglades watershed, it is a park that has faced many trials and tribulations, in large part due to the ongoing challenges of rampant development. Now, part of one of the largest restoration efforts in the world, the park continues to protect wading birds, valuable water resources, and an important array of tropical birds, animals, plants, and habitats that both directly and indirectly benefit neighboring human residents. Being among those neighbors, the Everglades region once again commits to supporting this park and the larger namesake ecosystem in 2023 through various educational and advocacy actions. The Everglades region also remains committed to promoting bird and wildlife conservation in 2023 through ongoing population monitoring, habitat restoration, and advocacy programs, as well as pursuing new opportunities as they arise. In the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, our thoughts are with those who are most impacted by the storm, and we renew our commitment to climate action in 2023. It is a humble reminder of how vulnerable our state is, and we aim to strengthen our pursuit of nature-based solutions for a more resilient future. Finally, the Everglades region feels strongly that a healthy environment should be accessible to all, and that this goal is best accomplished with a diverse and united community. We will continue our organizational efforts in 2023 to ensure our programming and messaging is accessible and to seek new avenues for connecting with diverse audiences. This concludes the resolution summary for the Everglades region. Thank you very much, and we'll now go on to the next speaker.
Hi, I'm David Cox, Audubon, Florida board member, member of Pelican Island Audubon Society, and of the Indian River Lagoon Regional Conservation Committee. As many of you know, the Indian River Lagoon is an unusual treasure in the state of Florida. It has suffered from over drainage, nutrient pollution, and now the loss of significant portion of its seagrasses, and is home instead to an algal dominated system that is posing challenges to all of the wildlife and the human communities that surround it. The Indian River Lagoon Regional Conservation Committee's conservation priorities this year continue 4 efforts from last year. We hope to increase funding for conservation initiatives throughout this region and seek long-term solutions for protecting water quality, continue public education on the values of native landscaping, and increase equity and inclusion of all people with Audubon. Clean water is the unifying thread through all of our priorities. The priorities also improve resilience towards an issue of unique importance to this region, sea level rise due to climate change. Chapters will advocate, educate, and perform outreach among all sectors of our community, from our neighbors, the public at large, agency staff, and elected officials, through meeting with officials, attending public meetings, sharing information through individual and form letters, social media, and the press, and making presentations whenever opportunity presents itself. Therefore, we resolve that the chapters in the Indian River Lagoon region will support regional, local, and state initiatives to increase funding for conservation initiatives. We will be working with local governments to explore local bond initiatives for land acquisition and conservation. Developing local funding will stimulate cost share on projects, multiplying overall funding concomitantly. We intend to work with our regional state legislators to restore and sustain funding for Florida Forever and associated programs at the $300 million per year level, and work with water management districts to sustain their millage rates and direct funding towards land and water conservation projects on public and private lands. We intend to develop a culture of clean water. And in our region, it's especially important to phase out land application of all biosolids, diverting them towards energy production and other useful purposes. We support and strengthen fertilizer ordinances in the counties that comprise the region. And we also hope to improve agricultural best management practices. Our third priority is encouraging native landscaping for wildlife and water benefits and developing local ordinances to stop the sale of all invasive plants and wildlife on the SISMA list. We will encourage landscaping with native plants to create better habitat for wildlife, including resident and migrating birds and pollinators, rather than invasive non-native plants. We will support native landscaping in all new developments and redevelopments. We intend to educate decision makers, homeowners associations, garden clubs, and other citizen groups on the benefits of native landscaping and how to implement residential best management practices. We encourage all chapters in the state to distribute native plants and seeds to their community members. And lastly, we intend to promote equity and inclusion in all of our chapter activities. We actively solicit involvement from diverse communities in programs, field trips, and other activities. It's important to emphasize that we cannot merely invite diverse groups to join us, but we must also join them in their community activities on a two-way street of fostering closer relationships. That concludes my presentation, and now I'll hand it off to Central Florida.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Lammers, and my home chapter is Halifax River Audubon. I'm with you this evening to represent the 11 chapters that make up the Central Florida Regional Conservation Committee. The Central Florida RCC includes much of the remaining conservation corridor running through the central part of the state. It's land that is rich in biodiversity and in unique and threatened species of both flora and fauna. Given increasing threats from development to this environmentally important land, we will continue to work to protect it and to protect water quality and water resources. In fact, because we have made progress against our 2022 priorities, we've decided to continue to work on them during 2023. Therefore, we resolve that we will continue to promote Lake Apopka restoration, visitor access, and a new Audubon Nature Center. Lake Apopka is both a cautionary tale and one of redemption, and visitors there, no matter their degree of understanding of birds, are able to see them in a beautiful habitat and to learn about them. We will continue to monitor and act on local and state government and land use decisions that impact wildlife habitat. And finally, we will work towards programs that will highlight equity and inclusion and that will foster diversity in our membership, including our leadership. Of these priorities, the one that we're in the early stages of generally is equity, diversity, and inclusion. Some chapters have taken some very good initiatives all on their own. The chapters that participated in FLEDGE were very pleased with the program and have recommended it heartily. And perhaps most important, they feel confident about moving forward. And some chapters are still, frankly, trying to figure out how to begin this work. So this particular priority, which diverges somewhat from our more traditional conservation work, but is no less important, will receive special attention and effort in the coming year as we look forward to making significant progress on a healthy environment for all that will lead to understanding, to two-way education, and to effective advocacy. Thank you for your attention. This concludes the presentation of the Central Florida Regional Conservation Priorities for 2023, and now the next speaker will join you.
Thank you. My name is Christine Rowland, and I'm with West Pasco Audubon and representing the Florida Gulf Coast region. In the Gulf Coast, we have 11 chapters: Venice area, Sarasota, Manatee, Eagle, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Tampa, West Pasco, Hernando, Citrus, and Cedar Keys. The Florida Gulf Coast has habitats that support a great diversity of species, and yet many essential wildlife habitats are being degraded, altered, and fragmented and rural landscapes are experiencing increased urbanization. The effects of climate change, sea level rise, and harmful algal blooms threaten offshore, coastal, and inland ecosystems that the birds depend upon throughout the region. Populations of many species have declined in their historic ranges and require significant intervention and management areas to prevent further population declines and local extirpation. Estuarine systems throughout Florida's Gulf Coast region suffer from degradations due to pollution, flood control, strip mining, development, and consumptive water use projects. However, Audubon staff and chapter volunteers have worked to protect shorebird and wading bird nesting habitats. The Suncoast Shorebird Partnership now ranges from the Tampa Bay area into Charlotte County and is part of the larger multi-partner Florida Shorebird Alliance. Lease-turn rooftop nesting monitors and banding garnered statewide and national recognition. Therefore, in the Gulf Coast, we have resolved to work together to increase Audubon's influence on conservation decisions in this region using the following strategies. Firstly, we're taking an active role in the local and regional habitat protection, improving functionality of natural systems, and continuing to raise the Audubon profile as a stakeholder. And what this looks like is, to some degree, chapter field trips, Christmas bird counts, great backyard bird counts, hooked bird campaigns, shorebird stewardship, bird population surveys. And we're using community science programs to recruit volunteers and to generate and submit data sets using programs like eBird as relationship building tools for the foundation of advocacy, conservation, and education. We're also identifying and supporting advocates to speak at local and regional public meetings regarding issues facing coastal and other environmentally sensitive areas, engaging cordially and in a productive manner. We are seeking opportunities to serve on advisory boards, publicly acknowledging and celebrating successes, participating in land management reviews, and building relationships with local agency staff. And finally, promoting bird-friendly programs such as Plants for Birds, Lights Out, Green Building, and other best practices. Our second strategy is to weave climate change into our existing work, education and communications. And this means really promoting climate change education, both within and beyond the chapter network. We're collaborating with local partners to develop climate resilient solutions, such as restoring natural coastlines to respond to the effects of sea level rise and changing climate patterns such as droughts and floods, and also underscoring the benefits of natural areas, wetlands, living shorelines, and native plant landscaping as natural and nature-based climate solutions. Next, we are expanding the effectiveness of Audubon as a conservation organization. And this really means elevating EDBI, conservation within chapter leadership and members. We're communicating a commitment to EDIB and sharing resources such as statements, articles, and stories among chapters and our members, and using all chapter projects and activities as opportunities to engage new audiences and partners. And our final objective is to support youth education and involvement. And to this effect, we're recruiting members to participate in Audubon's CLI initiative, sharing best practices for youth Audubon activities, offering scholarships, and implementing internship programs. And that concludes our resolutions. And then we move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jim Brady, representing the 4 chapters in Northwest Florida. Northwest Florida's Panhandle and the Big Bend coastal areas are among the most beautiful, least developed, and ecologically productive regions of the state of Florida. The Panhandle is also home to several important military bases, which harbor thousands of acres of wildlife and forests. Oil and natural gas exploration and recovery have long been banned in state waters near us, but this did not protect us from the effects of the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill disaster. In the wake of that event,
our remaining coastal wildlife and habitats are more important than ever. Therefore, be it resolved that the 4 Audubon chapters in Northwest Florida will mobilize volunteer leadership, members, conservation allies, and others to build the case for strategic land conservation and sustainability in the Panhandle. We will mutually support chapters across the Panhandle in conservation activities and projects that engage the collective power of an inclusive community invested in environmental equity and justice. We will initiate integrated planning among the Panhandle chapters to develop viable support plans for maintenance of chapter conservation activities. This arose after the disastrous hurricane effects on Panama City and that chapter. We will protect and sustain the Panhandle's biodiversity by supporting the Department of Defense's sponsored Northwest Florida Sentinel Landscape Program, by partnering with established and evolving Panhandle estuary programs, and by supporting other programs of interest to Audubon Florida's conservation mission. And finally, we will continue to support the acquisition and management of critical conservation lands with particular emphasis on Florida Forever programs. And I will now move to our last speaker.
Hi, I'm Eva Askew-Hauser, and I'm a relatively new board member and co-chair of the Conservation Committee. Our beautiful area represents a diversity of ecosystems, beaches and dunes, springs, coastal marshes, and national and state parks that provide support for resident wildlife and birds of the Atlantic flyway. Therefore, we are resolved that the Audubon chapters in Northeast Florida region, in alignment with Audubon Florida and the Atlantic Flyway program, and using information derived from sound science, will work together to strengthen Audubon's role as a conservation leader in Northeast Florida. And we'll be using the 4 following priorities. First, to share resources, ideas, successes, and failures among chapters to facilitate achievement of conservation goals. We're going to spread good messages through social media and chapter activities, such as extensive bird walks. We're going to educate resource managers and the public in the use of eBird, and we're going to promote the value of treatment wetlands. Next, we will engage partners to achieve regional conservation goals, looking at things like climate change education, resiliency planning, and the support of alternative energy. We'll support the restoration of the Ocklawaha River system, create native, bird-friendly communities, work towards state and local policies that improve bird conservation and improve management of conservation lands. We are currently in a boom of development in our area, and this has called us to action in lots of ways. We will participate in monitoring and stewardship programs that includes Eagle Watch, Jay Watch, Kestrel Box monitoring, Lights Out Northeast Florida, the Prairie Creek Reserve, Bird Banding Lab, and local shorebird participation. And we will continue to engage with underrepresented groups, reaching out to local leaders, developing programs and events that encourage participation from diverse groups, invite local leaders of underrepresented groups to participate in chapter activities and advocacy work, and to continue to work with schools and libraries to spread conservation messages and foster an appreciation for the natural world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Erica Zambello. I'm the Communications Director, and I will be leading you through a two-step voting process. Let me get the first poll up for you. You should be able to see 5 questions. If you're only able to see 3, that means you have to scroll down for the remaining 4 and 5. It will not let you do all, it will not let you submit until you do all of them. So I will give you some time. I can see how many people are participating. All right, we're about 20% of the way there. If you have any problems, feel free to drop a question in the chat. We're at 73%. We've gone just under a minute. %, 78%. Just giving folks a little more time. All right, we're just gonna do about 10 more seconds. Okay. All right, this is the first one. Based on these, they were all approved. I'm gonna take this first one down and we're gonna do the RCCs. All right, there are 7 questions on this one now. So you have to go through all 7 in order to submit. It's been about 30 seconds with about half participation. Much faster this time. All right, I'm just going to give it about 10 more seconds. All righty, the results of this one are unanimous. Oops, one person came off mute here. All right, based on this, all were approved. I'm going to stop sharing. The voting is now over. And Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you all for, I should introduce myself. I'm Beth Alvey. I'm the Director of Policy for Audubon, Florida. I want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your time with us this evening. And as Mary Jean mentioned earlier today, this event signifies the importance of collaboration between the state office and our chapters scattered across the state. And for that, we are grateful. I don't want to take too much of your time this evening, but before we leave, I'd like to say thank you to our hardworking communications team of Erica and Renee for organizing and for keeping us on track. And I just want to, before we close, I'd like to remind you that of our next virtual session, Winds and Works for Birds in Florida, a year in review, which will be on Thursday, October 27th at 6 p.m. join us. I think you will enjoy it. Thank you, Erica.
That's all, everyone. Thanks so much. We're going to close out the meeting now.